I think everyone can hear me, but let me know if you can. And happy October. So my name is Sophie Weston Chien. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently the Chancellor's postdoc fellow for faculty diversity for CU in the environmental design department. So I'm also teaching, but mainly doing research on a lot of what you'll see today. And today I'm presenting this talk, which I'm calling Soft Sites, Textiles as Feminist Practice, and we'll kind of unpack what that means. So to start, I describe myself as a designer organizer. I'm a practitioner and educator who builds community power through social and physical infrastructure to ensure people can shape their own spaces. I come from disciplinary backgrounds in the built environment, but really interested in kind of breaking that open and making sure that typical client developer relationships are kind of disrupted in different ways. I come to this as a designer. I've been taught to visualize things, to reframe problems, to think and make as a response. But I realized that again wasn't really enough, right? If you're just bounded by the clients that hire you, you're limited by their creativity and not your own. So I've been doing kind of co-curricular learning about organizing and thinking about how to embed my work and kind of focus on developing relationships within it, learning a lot about direct action and what that looks like and what that means and the ethics of it and kind of what it takes to do it, and to think and be really action oriented. So together those things, I'm able to think in kind of a scalar way. I think structurally, both in terms of physical form, but also in terms of like how society functions, and hopefully coming together, realize systemic change. So how do we deal with these kind of wicked problems that we're faced in the world right now? So that's kind of the background I'm coming from. I have, my degrees are in architecture, landscape architecture, and planning. So I kind of come as well with those skill sets. But I also realized like those skills weren't enough. So I began to do more research into textiles. And I did that for a pretty specific reason. This is from an excellent book called All That She Carried. The author talks about the mytho-histories of groups. It's really common around the world. There's so many traditions of different tapestries and textiles that carry meaning and messages and kind of hold and bear witness to historical events to share for future generations as warnings, as ways to communicate, as ways to grow and build together. They come in many names. Story cloths, I think, is one that I'm pretty fond of. But there's a whole lineage of these, contemporary and also historic. So starting with Faith Ringgold's story quilt series about her experience living in Harlem, which are really beautiful. And then we go to the kind of resistance quilts in Chile, happening actually around kind of a similar time. There's also the Hmong cloths, which talk about their kind of migration stories. These also include figures, so the first three all kind of include figures, and this one includes text to describe the experience of movement. This one might be the most famous like fiber art project that people know, but the AIDS Memorial Quilt, which was spread out on the Washington Mall in the late 80s. There's also more contemporary ones. So this is an ongoing project. It's called the Witness Blanket, and it kind of collects and then patches together artifacts from residential schools. So Indigenous folks in Canada who went through that, how to kind of witness their experience and the harm, but also some of the community, I think, resistance to that as well. And then the last example I'll share is a Sami artist who's still really active, but using textiles to record her life ways. She often uses the metaphor of crows to stand in for the kind of hegemonic powers that have disrupted her indigenous lifeways. So from that, building on all those traditions, I'll present my first project. I did it with a really close friend and collaborator, Amanda Ugorji, and we call it Soft City. And so this project's goal was to really use data through textiles to tell the past, present, and future of Black neighborhoods in the Boston area, which is where my collaborator was from and I was living at the time, to move from just damage data to finding hope and agency in stories and sight. So again, this was like building off of the kind of disciplinary background I have of planning and landscape a little bit, but this is the base data that we use to get to it. We use it's kind of a really simple GIS exercise, actually, of just understanding what's currently there, what's the land cover look like, what are the historical conditions. So we picked 3 neighborhoods from Amanda's youth that were like really well known and kind of thriving Black communities, and understood the kind of history of them through where the redlining policies were actually enacted, and then looked to the future and thought about what areas were going to be prone to flooding, whether it's sea level rise or from lots of storms like what we're seeing in Western North Carolina with actually just inundation. And then understanding contemporary population of Black neighborhoods in the areas, and then kind of compiling it all together. And what I've found in my experience professionally is that maps are great and very precise, but hard to actually engage folks with, right? You kind of glaze over. We have this like amazing ability to be really specific and map everything and quantify things, but at a certain point, people just aren't that interested in engaging with it if they're not a professional trying to directly influence it. So we were trying to do something different. So we learned kind of an entirely new process to us. We'd actually ever tufted, but we learned how to source yarn locally, and then found a supplier. And then in our living room, this is Amanda, my collaborator, we were roommates at the time. We built these huge frames out of 2x4, and using a projected the data on the back end, and then really just tufted what we did. We used textures to show the difference. So these are the 3 that we made, the 3 neighborhoods that we mapped. As you can see here, you can see the redlining districts, or the red line districts. We use relief to show where Black folks are now, so that's a little bit hard to perceive just from the photos. But if you kind of squint your eyes, the idea of the colors is that places that will flood are supposed to look wet. So you're understanding that Cambridge, all where MIT is extremely vulnerable to sea level rise with all of their expensive equipment actually in the basement. But that's a side conversation. Something else we learned in this process. But yeah, really just wanted to have conversations and have folks feel comfortable really like manipulating and understanding the neighborhoods that maybe they live in or they work in or go to. And so in terms of land cover, the greens are obviously like really forested areas, parks, places that water will infiltrate easily. And then the purples are kind of the paved parking lots, things that water will just sheet off of. And so understanding the relationship also between kind of access to green, access to tree canopy, and paved surfaces also has a relationship obviously to urban heat island. But that was kind of a secondary benefit of this. So they're also really big. This is us in front of Cambridge City Hall, actually, which is not quite on this map of East Cambridge, but just a little bit beyond. But now that we made this, we really wanted to get them out there, right? The whole point of this was to start conversations, was to engage young people, engage old people. And so that takes time. So we found the kind of easiest way into it was, just starting the connections we had. So we got it in an art show just to see what it would be like, how durable it would be. After that, we exhibited MIT. We got a grant from MIT to make the rugs initially. So that was pretty easy to find. We had kind of a friendly audience with architecture and planners. But then over time, we were able to talk about it and build relationships. So this is a really special picture. We had it up for the Boston Public Library for a month. And that's actually Amanda's grandma who lives in Boston, has lived in Boston her whole life. And so she was understanding the kind of lenses that we tufted with. And this specific exhibition saw about 7,000 kids, mostly school groups, come through and learn about it while it was up. And then kind of one of the most recent ones, we did a pop-up in downtown Crossing, which is one of the busiest pedestrian streets, apparently, I think north of New York. But again, like a public access place. And we really wanted not just it to be kind of an interactive art piece, but to develop programming around it. So it itself was kind of a genesis for having larger conversations about what the future looks like, how to build community, what it means to understand what the neighborhood is like now. So we held a lot of events around it in, I guess, early winter of 2022, which was pretty amazing to kind of learn from and experience. And so in that project, I think both of us learned that the rugs themselves were great storytelling devices, but had major limitations as a tool for actual design, right? It was able to tell the past, I think, better than maybe what the future would be, besides understanding the effect of climate change, but not really how to mitigate it, just what it will be like. So in this next project, I really wanted to kind of take on what it would be like to design a tool that's actually deployable by professionals. Again, like I've kind of oscillated between academia and professional practice. So thinking about, how to bring out this new technology into use. So my kind of guiding question for this was, how would an abolitionist practitioner, a designer organizer like myself, repair relationships between plant and human communities on the former Cop City site right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, learning again from professional tools to design tools of agency and decision making. So this was part of my master's thesis, and kind of there's a lot of background on a larger conversation on why I chose this site. But quick things to know about it. There was a lot of public upheaval against this project. There was a lot of suppression by the city of Atlanta. Over 100,000 Atlantans signed a petition to stop the project, to get it on the ballot so that people could say no, but it's moved forward. So it's a really unpopular project. And it's going in a majority Black neighborhood just outside the Atlanta city limits, and understanding how the police interface with the Black residents around. It was just like a really kind of upsetting project on a social lens, but also on an environmental lens. So this is kind of a quick rundown of what's happened on the site. I call this an injustice section, basically, of what's happened. So the land on the site was originally Muskogee. During Indigenous dispossession, there was a land lottery that kind of auctioned off the land to the white folks who could buy it. The Muskogee were then forced on the Trail of Tears to leave the land. It then became a plantation and had enslaved labor on the land. During this time, there's kind of unmarked graves that have been found from that. And then afterwards, the city of Atlanta bought it. It then became a prison farm where incarcerated labor worked on it, and then was abandoned in the 80s, and just kind of became a dumping ground. And then there's been some like passive reforestation on the site. So just understanding that this is like a really fraught landscape. It holds, I think, a lot of really important stories. And so kind of erasing that and not understanding the kind of soil memory even of it, I think was really problematic. So that was something that I was trying to kind of work through. And to give people context, this is kind of what the site looks like over time. You can see here, this is kind of one of the remnants of the prison farm itself, dilapidated building. And over time it was left and it actually, again, reforested. It became a pretty important place for community to gather. And then when the project started, again, kind of against the wishes of the petition, so much of it was clear cut. So this is what it looked like in April, and this is what it looked like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So to take a step back and to talk a little bit more about professional practice, because I wanted to kind of bring that into this project as well. For those who don't know, landscape architecture involves the planning, design, management, and nurturing of the built and natural environments with their unique skill sets. Landscape architects work to improve human and environmental health in all communities. And in this quote directly from the kind of like accrediting body of landscape architects, I was trying to kind of show the tension in the professionals that worked on Cop City, and actually argue that I would say that they're not upholding these values and understanding how to actually improve environmental health or human health in this community. So just to kind of lay some groundwork for what is to come, typical tools of the practice of landscape architects. They use soil maps to understand where and what to plant, how things will change over time, especially with climate change, how soils will move, and what species will, be great in some places or not in others. Landscape architects and other designers also use site models. This is basically just a 3D version of the site with or without design proposals to get an understanding of kind of the space of it. And then lastly, they use construction documents. So these are more internal, but they're both drawing and specifications to describe precisely how things will get built. So this is a title sheet, and we'll see kind of different configurations of this to come. But basically it details how things will go, and it is the kind of legally binding relationship between the designer and the contractor. And so for this project, I wanted to use the tools of practice to then understand kind of what the harm was and what the future could be. So this is a kind of counter or a complicit construction document. This was the planting plan that a landscape architect did, this firm, that just raised all the trees on the site. So proving that a landscape architect designed and intended for the site to look like it did, that was completely clear cut, I think was really important to show on this level. And this map key will also come back as well. So kind of documenting this harm as well using the site, you can see, right, this is where all the clay was. There's a complete loss of tree canopy. There's now really heavy habitat fragmentation between like this clear cut area and what is existing. The riverine system is now cut off here. There's bottleneck traffic that will cause CO2 emissions. There's no mention of the Atlanta prison farm itself and kind of the history of the site and what it's witnessed. And then there's actually a shooting range, which I'll talk about next, but how many hazard pollutants come from kind of the militarization of police and practicing kind of those actions. And all in all, 3,450 trees have been removed so far under construction. As we're seeing Hurricane Helene's path, this site could have played a pretty important role in actually absorbing a lot of the water that came really quickly. And now that there are no trees, all of it's going to sheet off about 50,000 bathtubs worth of stormwater that could have been managed. And more specifically, again, talking about this, the gun range here, this is a silenced gun range, so that will be kind of self-contained, but if they're using typical guns, the sound radius is well within both the church, that's like, this is the kind of privately owned bit, and then this is a youth detention facility. So young people that are growing up will hear the sounds of gunshots, which we know is harmful to their human hearing. And then last thing, just to understand the kind of regional plan of it. Atlanta, similar to Denver, is a rapidly growing city. They have a housing crisis as well. So looking for both places to develop, but also places to kind of maintain tree canopy. This was a huge swath that has just been cut as well. So that was my kind of analysis of it. Also grounded in this project was actual feedback from people. So I listened to many hours of, I think the longest city council meeting that Atlanta's ever had, which was, I think, 12 hours of pushback against Cop City. And so these are just, you know, an hour's worth of quotes from it to understand actually public perception of the project and what folks were asking for instead of Cop City. Okay, so with all of that context, as a designer organizer, I was thinking about what could the site actually be, right? What if Cop City didn't happen? What if the money that went to it could imagine something else? And so I created this general plan based on feedback, pulling some ideas from what folks have asked for. And this is maybe in this fits into the kind of construction document set. So this is still a very like professional facing tool that's pretty hard for folks who haven't been trained in design to understand. So enter back into tufting. I created tufting blocks that align to the actual map key of the sheets themselves at scale to then have people be able to make decisions and kind of negotiate on what the site will look like. And so the base of it, so this one is actually this one, but the base of it are all the different types of soil units. So they understand the kind of features of what's underneath. You know, topography you can change and adapt, but the soils are the soils. And unless you heavily remediate them, which is also kind of a conversation about site testing, they will stay the same. So I wanted to use them as a base for this model as well and understand how the kind of features of the soil align to different tree species. So as a site of repair, I think for this, repairing soils, repairing folks' relationship to this land, it really was a project about forestation. And so I conceived of two different kinds of forests that were also thinking about the future, right? Thinking about the future of a forest with a changed climate in the kind of region. So one is bringing back the Piedmont longleaf pine forest. I didn't know this before this project, but the Southeast is also a place where managed burns could be really helpful in bringing back key ecosystems. Which is, again, like I'm from this area, not something I grew up learning about. I thought controlled burns were a Western United States thing, but also important here. So creating an area to really experiment with that and see if you can bring back this key ecosystem that's actually missing. And then thinking about what self-determination actually looks like. And so part of my argument for that is that actually growing things that could be used for materials is also incredibly important. So having a diverse kind of pine stand that you can log and then become, right, the 2x4s that then build the future of the neighborhood as well. So these are the kind of two forest conditions I was researching, and then thinking about how it would come to the site. So again, this is the kind of test demo. That is the, you know, currently planned, this isn't the shooting range is like right here, but it's nearby it. So the kind of other alternative vision versus what's there. So you can directly understand, maybe you have a community meeting like this, and then afterwards, the landscape architects can go back and fix in CAD kind of what people talked about. But this is the model at full scale with all the folks around it. And really, as you're able to manipulate, like these are kind of all stand-in one-to-one for trees. This is a potential burn zone that you can try out and mark, and understand. So you can have a conversation with folks, right? Like, if you're gonna have a controlled burn right outside the city of Atlanta, you should tell people because they will be concerned about it. They're not used to that. So again, public education comes into this, as well. And just having people understand what the site could look and feel like, I think is really important. And so this is a bridge, to non-designers to be able to talk about, what tree canopy looks like, what it feels like, and how it could be designed in the future. Anyway, so these are kind of like the larger goals of the project, but I'll just highlight the last one, in this designer organizer future. The model itself is a living neighborhood record that documents community decision-making conversations, memories, and ideas. So in this one, I think a lot more successful in it being a tool for actual decision-making through the kind of textile itself. It integrates site topography, so a lot more specific decisions can be made, especially around species selections and aspect, and where water will drain. And then also integrates a cross-referencing ability with the construction documents, again, to kind of speak to the needs of professional tools, versus the kind of larger public. Okay, and then I guess I'll end on this project. It is very much in progress. It's also why I'm here at CU. I'm calling it Making Homelands, Tufting San Lazaro Lifeways. And this is a really conceptual sketch. But I don't know how many folks are familiar with San Lazaro here. It's a mobile home community in East Boulder. That's primarily immigrants and first-generation Americans. And so there's kind of a lot of reasons why I'm interested in this project, but my kind of investigation question is how do you document climactic and political migration over time and space, to learn from memories and ground cover, to witness what it means to make like a new home, which I think is honestly even more important than I thought now being in Boulder, being in such a homogenous society. I feel like it's really important to tell the stories of actually all the people who live here. And I'm trying to figure out ways to get more qualitative and kind of memory-based practices into these textiles as well. So they're not just driven by quantifiable data, but really capture and again, like witness what it means to live in a place, to have a relationship to land. So this hasn't happened yet, but this is very early on, kind of a peek in. In November, I'm hoping to have workshops with folks there to just understand their own life ways. Where are they coming from? What did it feel like? What was it like? What memories do they have there? What feelings of belongings do they have or not? We're gonna map everyone's movement, and also use it as a way for families to talk about their own stories, right? In my own experience, talking to my dad about his immigration story is really difficult, and he's not interested in sharing it. So hopefully this is a way to build kind of intergenerational knowledge about what it meant like to move. And also think about how when you move from a place with climate change, like you can't go back to the same place. Obviously culture shifts, but I think we're seeing a climate change so quickly that I also want to kind of bring into that component of like literally the ground might look different if you go back to a place that you lived 40 years ago. So that will make it onto there. The outcomes of this are thinking through a co-design textile process. So using these cards, developing relationships with folks to then actually map out what these lifeways look like, what they feel like, and then figure out techniques, new techniques to document climate change on a generational time scale, and be a little bit more fuzzy with that as well. Yeah, so thanks for listening. I'll end it there. This is how to contact me, and I'm free for questions.
So, yeah, thank you so much for coming and presenting. And then I represent the lab across the hall, which has all the textile things. So I was just curious, like, as opposed to all the different ways you can engage community and like participatory speculation, with drawing, with, I don't know, coloring and sculpture and paper, like what does textile bring uniquely rather than some of those other methods in your experience?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I can say that having done it, it does. And I'm trying to like learn from that kind of after the fact. Like I said, like I have run, public meetings before, and I've never seen people engage with it like they have textiles. And I think like actually touching it is so vital, right? Like we as, specifically in the culture we're in, I know, I'm sorry, I wish I could have brought them to. We just like instinctively understand that often we can touch textiles, right? There's a softness to them, there's a texture. I think also always displaying them on a table means you can engage versus things on the wall. And so there's a lot of other kind of supporting techniques around it as well. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear from you what it's meant for your work as well. But I think there's an innate relationship to it. I also like why, talk about like feminist practice as well. Like there is a softness and a care to textiles that, again, I think is really cultural and goes across almost all cultures to have that relationship. So using the kind of like hard skills of this discipline to then apply through textiles, I think has been really interesting. But yeah, I've only done a few projects, so like I have way more to learn about it, but that's what I found so far with it.
Thanks.
Well, I really like the fact that you have individual trees, and I think that's get it very easily for people to see, oh, if I walk here, I see the trees. Do you have people asking what kind of tree that is, or what does it mean to have the canopy like this way or that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the project for that project was really, right, the first time you encounter this, you're just seeing it visually and you're just trying to understand all of it. When you deepen your relationship to it, then you're really understanding what trees, like what kind of soil, right? Or like what the aspect of is that like loblolly pines like best. So I think it's one of those things where like if folks are really interested, they can come back and learn more and really understand how the trees function, right? Like this was kind of a quick study, but understanding in this soil type, there's going to be a few different trees that maybe like this better than out here. And so they're scattered in different ways. So just like building up that literacy of understanding relationships between drainage and species, I think is something that, is a little bit deeper in the project, but definitely the potential is there to develop that. I know like people want to touch them.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, because most often you see whatever the professional model, right? So they have representation of the trees, and they probably all look generic, and then all the model is going to be very clean, cardboard or wood, whatever, and totally devoid of what's underneath or what is the treatment of the pavement, all that. And you are showing all of that at the same time, which is very intriguing.
Yeah, and the goal is like, I don't know, maybe the hurricane came through and like this patch of trees are now like lost their canopy. You can actually physically manipulate that and show that. So when you go to like replant, you can make decisions about it.
Find collaborators, community partners, and how do they find you?
It's been pretty fluid. Yeah, there's no one way, I started with like my best friend who's my roommate and, have kind of kept going. And then I'm collaborating with Eco Arts Connections at San Lazaro, who They've worked a lot with CU folks before. So obviously looking for folks who are plugged in already, and kind of understand this and then working together to create something. Yeah, so that wasn't an answer, but
In Boston, did you happen to know Susan Thompson in Roxbury?
the name sounds familiar, but I
Fabricators.
haven't met them. But we should talk later. I would love to, yeah, write their names down.
When you discuss about the future, how do you mention with these elaborate rugs, because you can move them or manipulate them that easily? I'm asking because sometimes when I work with organizations, I use Lego serious play, and they can play around with the Lego figures and remove them or let them die by beheading them or whatever, or build something new. And here, apart from the fact that it looks like a piece of art, how do you manage it that they can think about the future, but can or shall not maybe manipulate your rugs, which are beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think the permanence of things is important, right? So the underlying soil conditions.
That's for sure. But
That's
well,
gonna
I-
really
but
hard
when
to
you have
change.
these future ideas.
But yeah, the idea is that like all of these trees can be taken on and off. And so potentially after you do a meeting. Yeah, you can see them here, like after the end, people got bored and just
Okay,
started
sorry, I
sticking
missed it.
them. Yeah, so these bottom things are made of foam. So it's really just like literally, a toothpick into foam.
Okay, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so then you would do a community meeting and then, someone would go back in the digital space and then really add them and spec them. But the conversation and play around it is totally possible. And they could behead the trees. Take off the canopy. Yeah.
Maybe curious where you're publishing your work, I mean, I see it as adjacent in a lot of ways to like data feminism and data visualization, and we're kind of in this funny field of human-computer interaction. But I'm curious where you personally like share this work, where do you publish it, where do you exhibit it? What does like the research part look like for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still figuring that out for sure. Again, I'm really interested in, this is obviously a super speculative project, but like getting as close to reality as possible. Like I am kind of committed to the disciplines that I come from, to make them better. And so a lot of my work is like really focusing on, and a whole other part of this was like the construction bidding process. So, thinking professionally about, design networks. But oftentimes they've been showed in an art context as well. I think the most comfortable fit for me is in the places that they are, right? So at the Boston Public Library, the San Lazaro work is gonna be at the Boulder Public Library. And so like, that's where I really wanna be, that's the kind of conversation I wanna have is with, folks who are from here. But yeah, I think intentionally it's, not one thing or the other and kind of stretches into different, buckets of research or kind of disciplinary interests.
I'm curious about your relationship to like fiber craft or other making practices before. My understanding is that this came through your collaboration with your roommate and friend. And so were they like a fiber artist and tufter, or were you learning
No,
together?
we're
I'm
learning
curious to hear
together.
about like your learning process as you develop new like material skills and engagements.
Yeah, sure. So I went to an art school for undergrad, and so I was always around like the fine arts world, and so I think that's why I feel pretty comfortable and versed in what a gallery show even is or stuff like that. And I did have a textiles friend that I would call and ask about, questions. I think specifically, and maybe I'll say this, in the textiles world, they have an interesting relationship to tufting, and that it's a little bit like not taboo, but it's not the highest form of art in the textiles world, right? They're kind of weaving is seen, and there's a whole hierarchy of like craft, which, is theirs. And I'm not a part of that, so I won't touch it. but in some ways it kind of freed me because I didn't care. I was like, tufting seems like the best way for me to do the work that I want to do. So that was really nice, but yeah, really YouTube taught. Yeah, I think when you're a maker. And so learning, craft and design all kind of came at the same time for me. And I've always been interested in textiles, but got the grant and then was able to kind of do it in the first place. So yeah, for me, I'm kind of like happy to be an outsider in that space. And dip my toe in when I want and then leave when I want to as well.
Okay, early in the talk, you had a picture of a place that was full of yarn, and I wanna know where that is.
Oh,
I was like, what is this magical?
yeah, it's way back. That's called Peter Patches. It's in Rhode Island.
Okay,
So I was in, my undergrad and graduate school were both in, New England, and so huge legacy of textiles as well there, both manufacturing and production. So, yeah, it's an amazing place. If you're ever, I think it's in Cranston. It's north of Providence.
it's like, well, Peter, I got Peter Piper.
Peter Patches.
Peter Piper.
Yeah, and it's just like from all the textile industry, it's just like all the extra. That will just like sell it really cheaply. So,
Whoa.
yeah,
Cheaper than a plane ticket.
yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, I'm looking for a place like this here, if anyone has suggestions.
Have you been to art parts yet?
I've heard of it, I haven't been, but yeah.
It's
not bad. It's not
Not,
bad.
yeah.
So people do donate things there, yeah. So you mentioned it was hard to talk to your dad about the immigration story. Did he see your work and what was his response?
That's a funny question. So I'm a second generation designer. My dad was trained as an architect, although he doesn't have a license, and he doesn't understand my work at all. Just like a low unknown of the family drama, he doesn't get it. So I'll try with this project to talk to him more, but who knows if it will get through.
So maybe, I don't know, because you mentioned that, and I thought that was interesting, because there are multiple things folded in there. One is talking to your dad, one is talking about his experience as an immigrant. And then the other one was you using the material probably very different from the language that he's using as an architect. And then the question is, so if you want to engage him, how would you do it? You say, this is my media, and he said, this is my media, this is not the same. I don't understand, there's no, I don't know, share language in there. So you don't have to answer it, but I'm just totally curious how you're gonna bridge that.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the other project with the construction documents,
Yeah.
that was my way to understand, because I was realizing that I think a lot of this work is like cool and interesting, but everyone's like, okay, so what? And so I'm, trying to think about different ways to actually kind of embed this process within existing designers' processes. Yeah, but in the workshop itself, it will be kind of all just like written histories. So it won't be engaging textiles yet.
But the story card,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
may engage in that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was with Soft City, you talk about having like groups go through. I was wondering if you noticed a difference between how kids interact with your work compared to adults.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was honestly, I didn't explain that very much, but this project we did in 2021, right? So this was like a true lockdown project. This was like me and Amanda kind of filled with rage, actually, at all the decisions that we felt were being made on our behalf that we didn't have any action in. And so for us, the priority was really, how do we talk to kids about what's gonna happen in the future without just making it scary and making it like, oh, you're doomed. Cause like, it was just for us too, to feel that way. So, yeah, it was really exciting, cause for us, it was like, all right, if a kid is excited and touches it and learns that the green are trees and the purple are roads and the pink are where people live and the orange are where people work, like, that's great. That is a great understanding I think we were really interested in like having kids be able to touch it and feel it. And then just learn like, okay, the built environment is constructed. It can be manipulated with my hands, it can be manipulated, as I get older and think about what I want to see changed. So that was the kind of level we were working at with kids. A full range understands different things, right? I think the middle schoolers learned a lot about redlining, but a 5-year-old's not quite ready to learn that. So just kind of like having the rugs be complex enough that they offer kind of a full range of the story, but also being tactile that anyone can engage. And if people just liked it because it's colorful, that's a start. I mean, I think people being able to touch art is a start. Because that's so uncommon. So